The world calls me a national hero, but they do not know the truth behind that title. My name is Elena. I am 90 years old, and I live in a small house overlooking the hills of Tuscany. In this valley, people do not call me Elena. They call me Nonna Coraggiosa, the brave grandmother. I am the last living witness of the partisan group that operated here during the war. Every summer, when tourists arrive, my grandchildren proudly point to me and say, "That is our grandmother. She fought against the fascists." The village children love to gather at my feet, begging to hear the story of the battle at the old church, the story of the lone woman who survived. It is a story I have told 100 times, a story of courage, of sacrifice, of the heroes who fell, a clean, neat, and tragically heroic story, a good story. But that is not the story I am going to tell you today. The real story is not a good one. It is messy, ugly, and filled with terrible mistakes. It is not a story to be celebrated. It is a confession, and it is a confession I have kept for 70 years. It begins here. They say that when you grow old, you forget many things. Names, roads, old stories. But for me, it is the opposite. The older I get, the more painfully clear everything becomes. The ache deep in my bones is not from the damp Tuscan weather. It is the memory of the cold stone floor in the old church. The ringing in my ears is not from old age. It is the echo of the gunshots from that night. My entire life was built on a story, and that story is a lie. But there is not much time left. Before I close my eyes for good, I must tear it all down. So let me tell you the real story. Not about Nonna Coraggiosa, but about Elena, the young woman who simply wanted to live, and the price she paid for that wish. The real story does not begin with an act of courage. It begins on a rainy night, with a promise, and with a fracture that I was too naive then to recognize. To understand why I did what I did, you must understand that we were not a single, united group. We were frightened people, each carrying different ideals. And in the end, that difference killed us faster than any German bullet could. My memory always returns to a night in an abandoned barn. The rain was heavy that night. We sat around a small fire, trying to find some warmth. I was mending a tear in Giovanni's jacket. He was the youngest in our group, only 18, a boy who was always trying to act brave. Across from me sat Isabella, his sister. She was my best friend, a strong, practical woman, and the best shot in our entire unit. She was meticulously cleaning her rifle, and in the shadows was Marco. He was our leader, the man I loved. He was the soul of our group, the one who always kept hope alive for us. He just sat there in silence, watching me. Then he spoke of a vineyard in Tuscany, where he and I would live after the war was over. His voice was so warm. In that moment, I truly believed in his promise. But we were not only made of people like that. We also had Luca. He was new, not from our area. Luca came from the city, a union organizer sent to help us get structured. He was thin, tall, and had eyes that never showed any emotion. Luca did not speak of peace or the future. He only spoke of the struggle. For Luca, driving out the Germans was only the first act. The real war would come after, between us Italians. Just as Marco finished speaking about the vineyard, I heard a sound. It was Luca's scoff, a dry, bitter sound. He was sitting in the corner, and he said, his voice full of sarcasm, "When this war ends, the real war begins, Marco. The fight for the land will have no room for bourgeois vineyards." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The warmth from the fire seemed to vanish. I looked up. Isabella had stopped cleaning her rifle. She stared at Luca with an icy gaze I had never seen before. I glanced at Marco. He said nothing, but I saw his hands clench into tight fists, his knuckles turning white. Marco finally spoke, his voice low and stripped of its earlier warmth. "This war is about winning back freedom, Luca. The freedom for every person to live their life as they choose, whether that is with a vineyard or a factory." Luca stood up. He was tall and lanky, and his shadow on the wall looked like a monster. He stepped closer to the fire. Your freedom is a luxury, Marco. My freedom is bread for the hungry. They are not the same. Isabella slammed the cleaning rag on the ground. She stood up to face Luca. She was much shorter than him, but her gaze did not waver. My family lost our farm to the fascists. We are fighting to get it back. That is our bread. What would you know about that? You only know the slogans from your books. The tension in the room grew thick enough to choke on. Poor Giovanni shrank between them, caught in the crossfire. I did the same. I just kept my head down, pretending to focus on the needle in my hand. Luca did not look at Isabella. He only looked at Marco. Do you see? This is the problem. Each of you fights for your own plot of land, your own home. We fight for an idea, a new Italy, and in that new Italy there will be no place for such selfishness. Do not call that selfish, Marco growled, getting to his feet as well. That is called home. It is family. Things you will never understand. They stood there, two men, two completely opposing ideals, separated only by a small fire. I thought they were going to lunge at each other, but then something else happened. Something that temporarily extinguished the conflict, but planted a different seed of fear in my heart. Gunshots. 2 shots echoed from a distance, cutting through the rain. Far away, but clear enough. Instantly, the argument vanished. Luca and Marco looked at each other, then both turned to the door. Isabella already had her rifle ready. In a single second, they were comrades again. Patrol, Luca said softly. Or maybe just German soldiers hunting, Marco replied, trying to sound reassuring. But none of us believed it. No one slept that night. We took turns standing guard in silence. The earlier hostility had been replaced by a shared fear, but I knew the fracture was still there. It had only been temporarily covered over. At the time, I did not fully understand what Luca had said. I knew nothing of class struggle or revolution. I only felt a division. An invisible wall had just been built in the middle of our small room. Marco's dream was of peace. Luca's dream was of another war, and we were trapped in the middle. That was the seed of the end. Not the enemy's bullets that night, but the words that sowed suspicion among comrades. And I was there to witness it all, never knowing that this very division would, later on, become my only way out. That fracture was no longer a small crack. A few days after that rainy night, it broke wide open. Intelligence reported that a German dispatch rider would be traveling alone on a motorcycle along a forest trail. It was an easy target, a chance for us to regain our morale after the recent tensions. At least, that is what I thought. Marco laid out the plan, but the atmosphere was not the same. He spoke, but Luca's eyes scanned the other men, as if gauging who would follow him instead of their commander. I saw the challenge in his gaze, and I am certain Marco did too. We were in ambush position by early morning. The forest was still full of mist, the air damp and cold. I hid behind a large tree. My job was to watch and signal when the target appeared. Marco and Isabella were in the best position to fire. Luca and 2 others covered our flank from the other side of the path. The plan was simple. Marco would give the signal, and we would all open fire at once. The silence stretched on. I could only hear my own heartbeat and the sound of dew dripping from the leaves. Then I heard it. The sound of a motorcycle engine, distant at first, then growing clearer. I signaled to Marco. I saw him nod, his arm raised, ready to bring it down. The motorcycle appeared. A single German soldier, just as the report had said. He was getting closer, very close. My heart felt like it had stopped. I waited for Marco's signal, but the signal never came. Marco's hand remained in the air. He was waiting for the perfect moment for a clean shot. I knew him. He never took risks with our lives. But Luca did not. I saw him move on the other side. Just a small movement, but in the silence of the forest it was enough. A dry twig snapped under his foot. The sound, though small, was sharp. The German soldier flinched. He immediately gunned the engine. "Fire!" Marco yelled, his signal now far too late. Gunshots exploded through the air. The shots were wild. I saw Isabella fire twice, but the motorcycle was already moving too fast. Luca's men fired too, but only sent up sprays of leaves and dirt. In a few seconds, it was all over. All that remained was the fading sound of the motorcycle engine and the acrid smell of gunpowder in the air. We had failed. The silence that followed was worse than the gunfire. No one said a word as we retreated deeper into the woods. Once we were safe, Luca was the first to speak. He was right there, within reach. Why did you wait? He yelled at Marco, his face red with fury. Marco turned to face him, his usual calm gone. I was waiting for a clean shot. Your impatience alerted him. A clean shot? Luca scoffed, the same scoff from that night in the barn. This is not a hunting trip, Marco, this is war. Your romantic ideas are going to get us all killed. And what about your recklessness? Marco stepped forward, his voice a low growl. Your recklessness nearly exposed the entire unit. You gambled with everyone's lives over your own impatience. They stood there, facing each other in the middle of the forest, no longer comrades, but two men fighting for power. Isabella stepped between them. Stop it, both of you. Listen to yourselves. We are not fighting so we can argue like this. Her gaze made them both fall silent. But I saw in their eyes there was no remorse, only suppressed rage. I just stood there, frozen. I saw the danger. It was not the German soldier who had just escaped. It was right here, among us. I wanted to say something to make them stop, but I did not know what to do. My throat felt tight. We walked back to the base in silence. A heavy silence, completely different from the one we had kept during the ambush. The promise of Marco's vineyard felt more distant than ever. I realized then that the enemy was not just outside. Something was rotting from within us. Giovanni's death was the breaking point. He did not die heroically in a fair fight. He died from a stray bullet during a brief, meaningless skirmish by a creek. A pointless death. We managed to bring his body back, and that was the worst part. Because we had to face the consequences every single day. That event did not unite us. On the contrary, it pushed us further apart, and it pushed me into Richter's arms. Isabella no longer cleaned her rifle. She did not cry, did not say a word. She just sat there, in the corner of our shelter, holding Giovanni's rifle. She held it the way one holds a newborn child. Her eyes were empty. Her silence was more terrifying than any scream. It was a permanent accusation, hanging over all of our heads. Marco changed completely. He no longer spoke of vineyards. He did not sleep, and barely ate. He became obsessed. All day, he would just hunch over the map of the old church where the Germans kept their weapons depot. I could see the hatred in his bloodshot eyes. The plan to attack the church was no longer a strategic mission. It was an act of revenge, a funeral pyre for Giovanni, and he was ready to throw all of us onto it. Luca saw it, and he objected. I remember the night Marco gathered us to announce the final plan. He spoke of infiltration, of planting the explosives, his voice dry and emotionless. When he finished, Luca spoke up. We cannot do this, Marco. Marco turned to look at him, his gaze sharp as ice. And why not? Because this is madness, Luca said bluntly. Their defenses there are too strong. We do not have enough men, not enough weapons. This is not a mission. This is a suicide mission to satisfy your own wounded pride. The air froze. Marco stepped up to Luca, his voice a hiss. Wounded pride? Did Giovanni die so we could run away, Luca? So we could listen to your cowardly reasoning? Giovanni died because we made a mistake, Luca shouted back, the first time I had ever seen him lose his composure. And this is an even bigger one. Sending everyone to their deaths will not bring him back. They were standing so close I could see the veins bulging on Marco's neck. Luca's hands were clenched into fists. I thought they were going to come to blows right there. Anyone who does not want to go can stay, Marco growled, enunciating every word. The mission will proceed. He turned his back on Luca, a final act of contempt. I stood there, and for the first time I felt truly afraid. Not of the Germans. I was afraid of us. I looked at Marco, and I no longer saw my commander, the man I loved. I saw a stranger being consumed by grief. I heard Luca's words, and though I hated him, a part of me knew he was right. And in that heavy atmosphere, I received my assignment to scout the church alone the next day. I did not go because I was brave. I went because it was the last command in a world that was already falling apart. And I did not know that it would also be my first step straight into a waiting trap. I was captured in silence. There was no screaming, no struggle. Two men in black emerged from the shadows, and before I could even realize what was happening, a rough burlap sack was pulled over my head. I smelled damp earth and sweat. They dragged me away. When I was captured, I had prepared for death. I thought of Marco, of Isabella. I thought I would die quickly, but Richter did not give me that. He gave me something far worse, a reason. The sack was removed. I was not in a torture cellar. I was in an office, a warm office, with a fire burning in the hearth, and a porcelain tea set on the desk. A man in a black SS uniform was sitting behind the desk. He did not look at me. He was engrossed in a book. He marked his page, closed the book carefully, and only then did he look up. He had blue, cold eyes, and he spoke perfect Italian, without a trace of a German accent. "Hello, Elena," he said. "Please, sit. You must be freezing. Tea?" I did not move. My whole body was rigid. He knew my name. He poured 2 cups of tea himself. "I am Major Richter." He pushed 1 cup towards me. "Do not worry. It is not poisoned. I do not work that way." I still stood frozen. Fear made it impossible for me to speak. Richter took a sip of tea. He looked at me, not like an enemy, but like a doctor diagnosing an illness. "I have been observing you all for some time, Elena. A very passionate group, but also very divided." He paused, looking directly into my eyes. "I know about Luca. I know he is a communist. I also know he does not believe in Marco's leadership." Hearing that, a chill ran down my spine. He was right about everything. He knew. He set his teacup down. "And I know something that you do not, Elena." He spoke very slowly, enunciating every word, as if planting each poisonous seed in my mind. "Luca sent a man to meet with us 2 days ago. He made a deal. He will let the ones loyal to Marco die in the church. He will lead his remaining men away, and we will let him go." I was stunned. I wanted to say he was lying, but no words could escape my throat. Richter stood up, walked around the desk, and came closer to me. "Your war is already over. Marco has been betrayed by his own man." And in that moment, everything inside of me shattered. Richter's words, even if they were a lie, fit so perfectly, so terrifyingly, with everything I had witnessed. The argument in the barn, Luca's contempt, the furious confrontation in the forest, Luca calling Marco's plan a suicide mission. It all suddenly had a new, terrible meaning. We were not losing to the Germans. We had been sold out. I no longer felt fear. The fear had been replaced by a profound emptiness. It was all meaningless. Giovanni's death, Isabella's grief, my love for Marco, our ideals. It was all just a farce, a play for Luca to seize power. I looked at Richter. I no longer saw him as the enemy. He was just the bearer of a cruel truth. I had been prepared to die for an ideal, but I would not die for a betrayal. Hearing that, everything inside of me shattered. The arguments, Luca's contempt, Marco's suicide mission. It all suddenly fit together perfectly. I had no more doubts. We had lost, not because of the Germans, but because of ourselves. I felt a furious rage and a profound emptiness. Richter looked at me. He saw the change in my eyes. He saw the life in them flicker and die out. He did not need to say another word. He had won. He silently returned to his desk. He spread out a map. "Come here," he said, his voice gentle. I walked over. My legs no longer shook. They felt heavy, like lead. I looked down at the map. It was a detailed diagram of the old church, showing every corridor, every window, every staircase. He placed a red pencil on the desk. "Show me." When Richter pushed the map towards me, I was no longer thinking about saving myself. In my mind, they were already dead. Marco was dead because of his naive ideals. Isabella was dead because of her grief. And I would not die with them for a betrayal. My hand rose. It was no longer trembling. It was strangely steady. My index finger landed on the eastern window, where I knew Isabella would be positioned. I held my finger there for a second, then moved it to the entrance of the crypt, where the others would break in. Finally, my finger came to rest on the spot near the altar, where Marco would command from. I stared at the small circle that represented him, and for a fleeting moment, the image of the vineyard in Tuscany appeared in my mind, vibrant and warm. Then it vanished. A single tear fell onto the map, blurring the ink right over his position. It was the only tear I shed that night. And so, I pointed. I pointed to every position not as a coward, but as someone putting an end to a story that had already rotted away. Richter nodded. He did not seem pleased or triumphant. He simply acknowledged it. "All right, Elena," he said. "That will be all." I turned my back on the map, on Marco, on everything. I walked out of that room. The fire in the hearth was still burning, but I no longer felt its warmth. I felt nothing at all. I left that room believing I had made the only choice possible. I believed I was the victim of a greater betrayal. That was the lie I told myself for 70 years, until I discovered the final truth, a truth even more terrible than my own actions. Living with what I had done was a burden, but living with the thought that I had been forced to do it was a different kind of prison. For many years I leaned on that prison to survive. I became Nonna Coraggiosa. I married a kind man who never asked about my nightmares. We had children and then grandchildren. I lived a full life. But I lived it in a cage built from Richter's lies. The lie that Marco had been betrayed, that my actions, though painful, were unavoidable. Until one day, its walls came crashing down. My husband passed away one spring. After the funeral, when the house became too quiet, I began to sort through the things he had left behind. In the dusty attic, I found a small wooden box, its lock rusted shut. I thought it held his personal keepsakes. My old hands trembled as I pried the lock open. Inside, there were no photographs or medals belonging to him. There was a bundle of old letters, tied together with a frayed leather string. The handwriting on the first envelope made my heart stop. It was Marco's. I sank down onto the cold wooden floor. I did not know why my husband had them. Perhaps Marco had asked him to hold on to them, right before that final mission. My husband, my quiet man, had kept this secret for all those years. The letters were addressed to Marco's father, but it was clear they had never reached him. I tremblingly opened the last letter, written just a few days before everything ended. The paper was yellowed, the ink smudged in a few places, but I could still read it. He wrote about the war, the cold, the fear he never let us see. And then he wrote about Luca. "Luca and I clash a great deal," he wrote. "He sees the world in a different color, more practical and harsh than I do. Sometimes his words make me angry." I read that far, and I nodded. Yes, that was exactly what I had seen. That was why I had believed Richter. But then I read the next part. "But I know that the future of Italy will need both the realists like him and the dreamers like me. We cannot rebuild this country with just one ideal. This mission at the church is dangerous, but if we survive, the first thing I will do is sit down and talk with Luca. We must find a way." I read that sentence over and over again. We must find a way. The walls of the prison I had built around myself began to shake. I had to hold onto the chest to keep from falling. Marco had never given up. He had never seen Luca as an unforgivable enemy. He had not been betrayed. He had seen the division, and he was trying to find a way to heal it. So then, what did I do? The very foundation of the lie I had lived on began to shake. For the first time in 70 years, I was no longer certain I was the victim. If Marco had not been betrayed, then there was only one truth left. A stark and terrible truth. But that was not yet the final blow. The blow that would shatter everything came from the mouth of the very man who had created me. The final blow did not come from the past, but from the present. My grandson, Leo, is a historian. He has always been proud of his hero grandmother and has spent years researching the partisan groups in this region. One afternoon, he came to visit me, his face a mixture of excitement and a strange sort of unease. He brought a laptop with him. "Nonna," he said, "I found something incredible. The Allied archives just declassified the interrogation records of prisoners of war. And I found the file for Major Richter. That name, after 70 years, hearing it spoken aloud, still sent a chill through me. I said nothing, just sat still and waited." Leo opened the laptop. This is the transcript of his interrogation after he was captured in 1945. And then my grandson began to read. His voice was steady at first. Then it began to tremble, as if he himself could not believe the words he was reading. Richter had been boasting about his psychological tactics. He said, "The most effective weapon is not a bullet, but doubt. With the partisan group at the church, I knew they had internal conflicts. Any group of people pushed to the edge will have conflicts. I just had to find the weakest link, the young woman named Elena, and weave a story for her." Leo paused for a second, looked at me, and then continued reading. His voice was almost a whisper. "I told her that the communist faction had sold them out. Completely fabricated, of course. Luca had never met with us. But people will believe any lie if it confirms a fear they already hold." She crumbled. Completely fabricated. Those two words echoed in the quiet room. They shattered everything. The last wall of the prison I had hidden in for my entire life fell to dust. The air filled with ash, and for the first time I saw the truth in the rubble. Leo had closed the laptop. He did not dare to look at me. The room was so silent I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. It was only then that I truly understood. The greatest trick was not that Richter had offered me a way out. The greatest trick was that he turned me into the weapon used to kill the very people I loved. The fracture within our group was real, but I used it as an excuse for my own cowardice. I did not betray them because they had betrayed each other. I betrayed them because of a lie, and that truth is heavier than 70 years of guilt combined. My story has no heroes and no victims, only a puppet, and a puppet master long since dead. Now you know. You know the real story of Nonna Coraggiosa. I do not ask for forgiveness. I only want, before I go, to be called by my real name, just once. My name is Elena, and I am a traitor.